Some of you are hanging with us. This is good. Good afternoon. Boy, it is great to be here. Just genuine thanks to my friend Alan, to Rob, to all of the folks who behind the scenes have put this together. Can we just give them a round of applause? What a fantastic day. And as I get older, I tend to put on my glasses so that I can see you all and see what's happening. But I'm going to try to be as brief as I can up here today. As a matter of fact, as I passed Alan on the way in, he said, I just have 5 words for you. Be brief, Blair, be brief. So at this point in the afternoon, I know the sun is shining, a lot of things are going on, but what a great place to be today. What a great place to be. I want to spend just a couple minutes with you. I want to talk about really why I'm so optimistic about this country, and a couple of minutes framing some of the things that you heard today about where we are, because despite all of the challenges, I could not be more bullish than I am right now about America, and more particularly, I could not be more bullish about the young people. I'm looking around trying to see if there are any young people left in the audience, and don't you old folks raise your hands either. There we go. We still have some young folks left. Let's give them a round of applause. Aren't they fantastic? And I'll tell you, as I think about it, and while we're at it, I have to ask us to show some love for the parents of these young people, because we're the ones who brought you guys into the world. So let's give it up for the parents. Let's give some love to the parents. And as a parent of 4 kids myself, and I know I've got limited time, I can't help but be a storyteller. I have to tell you a quick story, one of my favorite parenting stories, and some of you may have even heard me tell this story in the past, but it's a story about 100 years ago, a man and his 5 sons, and he takes his 5 sons out in the yard, and he says, which one of you boys pushed the outhouse into the river? And nobody speaks up, and so the father finally says, you know what, let me tell you the story about George Washington and the cherry tree. And we all know the story, and he told the story about George Washington telling his father, I cannot tell a lie, I cut down the cherry tree, and George Washington didn't get in any trouble. And so the youngest boy saw this as his opening. And he said, wow, this is my chance. He raised his hand, I can be a hero in front of my brothers, I can look great, I can not get in trouble. He said, Dad, I cannot tell a lie, I pushed the outhouse into the river. And the father took the boy around the back of the house and gave him the worst whipping he'd ever had in his life. And at the end of it, the boy, through teary-eyed, looked at his father. He said, Dad, I don't understand. I thought if I told you what George Washington did, I thought I wouldn't get in trouble. I don't understand, Dad. And the father looked at the boy and said, son, George Washington didn't cut down the cherry tree while his father was in it. You got to love the next generation. And I do, and I think all of you do. But as we think about the era that we're living in, with all of the tumult, with all of the demonstrations, with all of the community versus police, with all of the craziness that seems to be going on with our system of government, it really does seem like America's in a state of decline. But I want to suggest, in my few minutes with you, I want to suggest something different, that we're just going through another part of America's evolution. And it's something that's happened in every century. This is our 21st century version of that evolution. And within that, I want to suggest to you something that I suggest to audiences very often, which is this is our moment in history. And in every era, there are people who actually sleep through their moment in history. They don't realize that this was their moment until they look back retrospectively and say, that was a big moment. And I can assure you today that we are living through a pivotal moment in American history. And just like any other critical or pivotal moment, this is the moment where we can rise up and sustain the greatness of this nation, or we can falter and miss our opportunity. Harriet Beecher Stowe once wrote, the bitterest tears shed over graves are always for words left unsaid and deeds left undone. So how do I know that this is our moment? How do I know that there's so much that we can do? Well, let me start with the reason why we're all here and rallying around our youth, and we've heard it all day through different speakers and approaches and conversations, that there are 5.5 million young people in the U.S. who are not at work and not in school, age 16 to 24. Let me just emphasize that this is a staggering number. And I will go on to say that having nearly 6 million young people who are disengaged from society is the defining issue of our time. Now, I'm a guy who spent some time on the corporate side of the fence. For companies, it means there's a need to get involved and to bring these youth into the DNA of corporate America. And that's because these young people are the future workforce, and they're the future customers for companies. And for America as a whole, it's time to innovate and collaborate as never before. And again, mark my words, that 50 years from now, they will be talking about and writing about what we did or what we didn't do in this, our moment in history. And they'll draw one of two conclusions, and I believe it's a binary set. Either they'll talk about an era where young and old, where rich and poor finally came together to build a future America that is even greater than our past, or they'll write about a country that ignored our youth and fell from grace. A nation that was torn asunder by our inability to unite at a critical time, a nation that couldn't rise above our differences. Those are the two options. And I will tell you, as an add-in to that, that if the recent protests of the last few months tell us nothing else, they tell us that our nation is still wrestling with serious issues of inequality in a very critical way. So we're at this defining moment because we have unrest. We're at this defining moment because we have many of our treasured systems that are broken. I know most of you know this statistic, but it's another staggering one. Right now in this nation, a young person drops out of high school about every 2 minutes in America. More than 1 million kids a year. And if you happen to be an African American male, you have a 70% chance of ending up in the criminal justice system within 15 years after you drop out of high school. In the time I've been on this stage, the next Albert Einstein, the next Dr. Martin Luther King have dropped out of high school. We cannot afford to lose this human capital. We need them as contributors to our great society. And we're also at a defining moment because the world is changing. Globalism is upon us. And there are other countries who are out there who are now poised and determined to beat us at our own game in the 21st century. But you in this room and the folks who've been on this stage all day, you're the hope. You're the innovators. It's not going to be someone else. There's going to be no knight on a white horse that rides in. This is it. This is the group. And as we watch the elections that are going on in America right now, if you can watch the elections that are going on in America right now, one of the things that is clear as a bell is that government is not going to solve all of the social ills of America the way that it has in previous centuries. We cannot wait for government. And I'm not anti-government. I believe in government. But all I'm saying is government will not be the social innovator in the 21st century. That is up to the people in this room. And it's up to nonprofits, and it's up to philanthropy. And yes, it is up to American business. Government's still going to do what it does best, which is scale winning ideas. It will be a vital part of the picture. But the rest of us must innovate, create, and launch the big ideas of this century. Republican or Democrat, whether you're conservative or liberal, we have to agree that squandering our human capital and our talent at a time where we can't afford to do so is the biggest issue of our time. So, as a related note, by the way, and the privilege of me taking another 30 seconds, I really think we have to get this notion that somebody has to be poor in America out of our minds. I really do. I don't believe that. Too much of our nation's modern economics is built on this principle of a false principle of scarcity. Sure, there's only X number of slots at Harvard University, but let's innovate and find a way to get our young people work ready, educated by any means necessary. So as I close, I want to leave you with just 3 simple thoughts. Thoughts that are not super complicated, but hopefully they're thoughts that will help us as we think about our moment in history. The first one is, let's think very carefully with our young people about how to change the perceptions of our young people in America today. Let's move, as some of the speakers have said, from the deficit model of viewing them and their experiences to the asset model. A few months ago, I had the privilege of working with one of my heroes, Dorothy Stoneman. Dorothy, are you still here? Dorothy, that's one of my heroes. Let's give Dorothy another round of applause. Dorothy, myself, and several other people took 14 of America's leading CEOs, and we put them in a room in a roundtable discussion with about 60 or 70 of America's young urban youth. Each CEO at a round table had 5 or 6 young people surrounding them. And we told the young people, and Dorothy backed me up on this, we told the young people, just be yourself. Just tell your story to America's most powerful business people. And we told the CEOs, what we want you to do is just come in with an open mind about new sources of talent that you haven't tapped yet. And the results were amazing. The youth told their stories, but now they told their stories proudly through the asset model, talking about the things that they'd overcome just to be there and how much perseverance and fortitude they had, versus the deficit model of thinking that something's wrong with you if you happen to grow up impoverished or with challenges. And by the end of this session, many of these CEOs were on the verge of tears. They couldn't believe what they saw in these young people. They couldn't believe what these young people had overcome just to be in the room. And of course, in the end, they saw these young people very differently. Not as challenged youth with no skills, but as prospective employees with incredible levels of perseverance. Most of them wanted to hire every single young person at their table, and some of them actually did. They walked away with a new sense of understanding about the sources of talent and the overlooked talent in America. And maybe most importantly, their entire image of urban youth changed in that one afternoon. We have to make this personal. In changing the dialogue from deficit to asset model, we break down the barriers of misunderstanding. This work cannot be done in theory. It cannot be done from 20,000 feet. The only way to change the image and perception is when we begin to understand each other on a personal level. Number 2, let's agree to use an expression that I like to use. Let's agree to collaborate until it hurts. Until it hurts. Now, I'm just going to say this, and I feel like I can say this because I've lived in the nonprofit world for almost half of my career. Nonprofits are terrible collaborators for the most part. And it's not our fault in the nonprofit sector. We're actually incentivized to be fiercely individualistic. We're funded individualistically. We're funded with a home run culture where we have to hit grand slams in short periods of time. But we need to change the paradigm of collaboration. We need to do it right now. Our funders need to incentivize us to work together. We not only need to collaborate between nonprofits, we need to collaborate with the private sector and work with companies on solving the opportunity youth crisis in America. It's going to require a joint effort. About 6 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of being a part and helping to lead through my Brother's Keeper Alliance, an event in the city of Oakland. 35 Fortune 500 companies came together with almost 20 nonprofits in a room not unlike this. 1,000 Opportunity Youth showed up to the event. And the companies did what they do best. They interviewed and they hired the talent that was ready for work. And then the nonprofits did what they do best. They helped those young people who weren't quite ready for work to get ready for work with resume writing, with interviewing skills, with mock interviews, with mentorship initiatives that were all around the room. We even had a station there where a young person who didn't come prepared could get a suit and a tie and learn how to tie a tie. They could get their hair cut before they went into an interview. 35 companies, 20 nonprofits, 1,000 young people. At the end of the day, these companies conducted more than 600 job interviews in that day, and 300 young people walked away with jobs in that very day. That's what we have to do toward working together with a common goal. That's the image of collaboration. The issues are too big to solve by ourselves. And finally, let me just say this. Let's all agree to do something that's rather unusual. And it's another expression that I often use, and it's called making ourselves intentionally uncomfortable. I think it's a shame that far too few of us in America really see diversity as our greatest strength. And then far too few of us take the steps to actually deal with that reality. I remember years ago, and I'm just old enough to remember the movie Stripes. Don't raise your hand if you're old enough to remember the movie Stripes, but there are a few of us in this room who remember the movie Stripes. I remember Bill Murray called us a nation of mutts in the movie Stripes. In many ways, that's what we are. I was in Alaska a few weeks ago, and I found out a new piece of information. The dogs that run the Iditarod race, the dog race, 1,000 miles, they're not purebred dogs. They're mutts. They're mixtures of dogs who they blend together so they can run 6 hours at a time through the snow. They take 6 hours rest, and then they run them again for another 6 hours. America is, in fact, an eclectic mix of people from different backgrounds and different experiences, and that is precisely what makes us great. But in my next breath, I have to ask a question. How can we tap into that if we don't even speak to each other? If we don't live in the same communities? If we put up walls and barriers? We don't live in the same neighborhoods or go to the same schools anymore? When I was back in Seattle recently, I was asked to give a discussion about the state of Black America to a group of parents at one of the city's premier private schools. Frankly, I didn't expect any of these parents to show up. And when I arrived, there was a room full of people, mostly Caucasian. I started by letting them know that I wanted to begin just by showing them a video. And I said, as you watch this video, I want you to imagine that the person you see on the screen is your son or your relative or your grandson or your nephew. And I then showed them the extended play version of the Eric Garner video here in New York City. We all watched pretty silently in that dark room. We couldn't see each other's faces as the police choked the life out of a black man who all along the way cried out for help. It was a long 5+ minutes, and when I turned on the light, several people were actually crying or quietly sobbing in the room. I asked a few of them if they'd be courageous and just tell us, why are you crying? What is it? And they said two things that are vitally important and were actually somewhat amazing. First, many of the Caucasians in the room said, this is the first time I ever saw that video. And I said, really? I'd say more than a third of them had never seen this video. And I told them that that was a remarkable fact in and of itself, because every single black person in America has seen the Eric Garner video. But then they went on and said, when you told me to imagine that this was my son, I really did. And my heart broke in that moment. And then we got into a deep discussion about race. And as a segue to that discussion, I dropped a bombshell and I said, maybe you're beginning to understand why black people have some anger in America. All of what you saw on that screen has been going on for a long time. And the only difference is today, somebody pulls one of these out and is videotaping it. Being intentionally uncomfortable means forcing yourself to get into somebody else's space. It means a level of empathy that we don't usually have. It means reaching out and trying to get to know people who you've never been close to before. And yes, it sometimes means forcing yourself to be the only one in the room. Be the only one in the room, which as African Americans, that happens to us all the time. It doesn't happen to everybody in America. And I think it's one way of making ourselves intentionally uncomfortable. The more diverse our experiences are, the more people we can count as friends who come from a totally different place or a background, the more rich and fulfilling our own lives will be, and the quicker we will effectively solve the crises that our nations face, and the world will become a better place. So let me just end with you where I began. I'm very bullish about our future, not because we don't have problems, not because we don't have risk, but instead precisely because we do. But America has a great tradition of rising to the challenge. And that's why in spite of our challenges, in spite of our differences, the smart money is still on this nation. I'm bullish because I believe our young people are still the most energized and capable people in the entire world. I'm bullish because I believe corporate America's economic engine of innovation is now finally awakening to the fact that they can't stand on the sidelines anymore, that talent has been squandered, and that the future of their labor pool is now at stake, and the future of their customers who won't be able to afford to buy their product. And finally, I'm bullish because of all of you. And I'm bullish for the hope that emanates and the energy that's coming from this very room, from gatherings like this one. And we must continue. I'm very proud to be here today, and I'm very proud to be on this incredible journey with all of you. Thank you. God bless you.